So today's topic is all about transitions, and we are all going through a lot of transitions, a lot of involuntary transitions, things we didn't sign up for, things that we didn't want to have happen, and nonetheless, they are happening and they continue happening, and they fall on a number of different levels. They are changes to our perceived safety in the world. They're changes to our job definitions. For some people, they're changes to our job overall. And we have changes in our family life, changes in our social life, changes in our home life, for some, changes in our health, and changes with family status. I could go on, and I bet if we took a little moment to brainstorm, we could probably come up with more. But the point is, they're happening fast and furious, and our body has a whole normal set of reactions to change, transitions, and some transitions, in pre-corona life, there are transitions like a promotion or a move, or even things like graduation that people really look up forward to. And nonetheless, they still take a toll on our human system in terms of how we react. I wanted to start out by sharing a quote. It's by Robbie Shell. She is a writer based out of Philadelphia. And it says, "Transitions in life can offer opportunities for discovery." Okay, this is not going to be the tone of our talk today, but that is absolutely true. And I know that's happening for people. And as we talk about some of the tools that actually help your nervous system downshift and help maybe some of the churning and the moving and all of the distress that may be happening with all of these unsolicited changes that are happening in our lives, I expect you'll actually have room start to open up to get more into the type of thing that quote is implying, which is true, right? Which is that transitions can offer opportunities for discovery. But we're going to get there after we talk about a couple of other things. So what is normal? So what are some of the normal types of things that you can see when you're going through just any transition? Well, there's a reason why we gravitate towards routines. Our brain is processing a lot of different information at any given moment, regardless of any type of changes. And so when there are routines, it's the same concept around meal prepping. You don't even have to think. I know for myself, even if I have a nice healthy meal planned for my family at the end of the day, if I'm super exhausted and it involves a lot of decision making, I'm very susceptible to just ordering out because it's easier. All of a sudden, I can actually exhale. So with every new initiative or any type of change, you're actually putting a heavier load on your brain because you've got to make lots of decisions, and you've got to make quite a number of them, and sometimes very quickly. And that load tends to stress our system. So I think I listed maybe 12 types of kind of standard transitions that we're all going through. And like I said, there are probably even more. Those were blanket kind of umbrella types of things that we're going through this time. So you can start to multiply exponentially the type of stress that we're under, okay? And so what happens when we're stressed out? Well, there are a number of people on the call. What happens for me might be very different than what happens for you, because transitions tend to bring up in us whatever our survival mechanisms are, right? So for me, when I get very overwhelmed or things are super stressful, I do a couple different things. It's like I've got a few, like 2 or 3 different things that I tend to do. One of them is I get pretty hyper. Like I start doing a lot of activities. I start cleaning a bunch of things. I start planning a bunch of things. I start my scramble to feel like I'm going to survive or I'm going to be okay. That's one of my main ones. It's not healthy. I might get a bunch of stuff done, but it's coming out of an overload in my system, and that has spill outs of its own. And another one that I tend to do is I tend to totally retreat. So I'm one of the people who might just sleep a lot, or I might watch a lot of something. I might just disconnect, like my system's overloaded and I crash. And that's what happens for me. But I'm telling you, because there's a whole bunch of us here, we each might actually do different things when our system gets overloaded. So depending on what your things are, then those might have consequences that follow after that. Because if I do my first one, I actually start getting pains in my stomach, because what is happening is I am actually utilizing the adrenaline in my system. I am relying on my adrenals. They sit behind at the lower part of our back to move myself forward, because my system's totally overloaded. And so then what happens? Because now my body chemistry has changed, and I'll tell you what happens for me. And again, we're all different. So there may be physical symptoms that you're actually experiencing as a result of your particular coping strategy for your system being in overwhelm. And I can pretty safely say there is not a single person right now in our climate that has none of this. Some of us may be not having it every day, but it's just too much. There's too many changes happening fast and furious, and we all have limits as human beings. So there is definitely an across the board experience right now of people utilizing whatever coping tools we've learned to utilize when our system gets overwhelmed, just because of the amount of transitions and the amount of spill out from those types of transitions. So I want you to think for a second about what yours might be, because we are going to do, like each one of my Friday community gatherings, we are going to do a couple exercises that might actually help your system take down some of that overwhelm and also move it out of your body. Because we can't, you know what we do as human beings? We make these little deals with ourselves. Like, I'm just going to pretend this isn't happening, la, 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 la. And if I ignore it, or I pretend it's not going on, maybe it'll go away. And those strategies can work in a time limited way, but it's not going to work as a permanent solution, because whatever you just ignored or pretended wasn't happening is still going on in your body. Your body actually holds that data regardless of what types of tricks you're trying to play with yourself. And so when I'm talking about really engaging with some of this stuff, it actually helps your system, because instead of it being compartmentalized and just put away into another area, you're actually letting it express itself and move itself out of its system. And I talked a little bit about triggers a couple of weeks ago. I gave it a definition, but I want to revisit that just for a second, because this is very important when we look at the stress load on our body right now. When I said we're going to go back to whatever coping mechanisms we've used in our most distressing moments, that also has to do with whatever our triggers are. So a trigger is basically an experience where you are having something happen in the present day that brings up a whole bunch of felt and concrete, so maybe conscious or unconscious, data mapping from something you've been through before, in particular things that you haven't really worked through or that were distressing in your life. And so a way that you can tell if you're being triggered in the present moment is that you're having a standard transaction with someone, or you're doing a normal everyday task, and all of a sudden you're having a disproportionate reaction to something in the present day. And that can tell you that, oh, wow, I'm really upset, or I'm really agitated, or I'm notice that my throat is kind of closing up, or that my chest feels really tight. And that's going to tell you that something from the past may have been pulled up. And so that becomes relevant when we're looking at the kind of stress that comes from this type of overwhelm of transition upon transition upon transition happening, because you're going to see things like that coming forward. And so it can become a compounded type of situation. I'm not going to talk too much about the unconscious piece. That is definitely on the agenda for a future week, because that's a real area of interest of mine. But what I want to talk you through comes from a resource out of the Resilient Brain Project, which is my center's free online resource library. It is a library that has 12 areas of mental health, and then it has a whole bunch of connections to apps and resources and actions that you can actually do in the moment. And that's what we're trying to get at today. And every week that we do this on Friday are actions right now that you can do that are going to give you some relief and some empowerment about knowledge about your body. So I started to laugh just a little bit because the way that we named this particular area is called life changes. So life changes, I know that it has to do with navigating different types of transitions, including some life changes that aren't actually as light and fluffy as all that, like being forced to move out of your home, not because you chose to, although that's covered too, but because you've had a fire or something like that. We're certainly in some life changes that aren't like so light and fluffy. But I'll say, as a woman who's almost 50 and going through perimenopause, and it seems like it's been lasting way too long because I know some people go through it super quickly. They call that like the change of life, and it's supposed to be like a nice packaging around something, but it's actually, really overwhelming and challenging. So right now we're talking about hardcore life changes. The world is not the same right now as it was a month ago. And so I wanted to walk you through an exercise that's on there. It's under actually the actions for now. And it's an exercise that actually has 6 steps to it. And it is called Moving Forward in Transition. And the power behind the exercise is that you actually are taking stuff that's already swirling around in your system and moving it out of your system. And it does do a positive thing for your overall well-being and the sense of stress that you might be feeling in your body. So I'm going to walk you through that right now. If you have pen and paper, you can do it, or you can just jot notes and do it later, because it is the type of exercise that if you spend a bunch of time on each step, you're actually going to get more benefit out of it than if you kind of just walk through and do it quickly. And you're definitely, the power in the exercise is not in the thinking about it. What the power is in the writing of it. Those of you who are artistic can actually do visual representations in pictures or colors. It doesn't have to be words, but the exercise has power by putting things down on paper. So I'm going to go ahead and walk you through that. This is coming straight off of one of the many, many, like hundreds and thousands of resources that are on the Resilient Brain Project. So what I want you to do first is I want you right now to write a statement that clearly defines and describes your particular situation right now. And that can include, I want to make 2 distinctions on this exercise. Change, which is happening all around us, is an external phenomena. That is happening. That is objectively true. Transition is what's happening inside of us. It's internal to us. So what's happening in our system and in our bodies is part of a transition. So this exercise is going to distinguish a little bit between that, because a lot of the things that we can't control are the external circumstances. And what this exercise is focused on is helping us change the parts that we can control. So you write that statement, and some of the things that you should be writing are things like, what around me is changing right now? What transition, so there's the internal word, do I have to make, right? And that could be, this first step could be a very thoughtful exercise around, I need to modify. I'll just tell you, for me, because I have way too many people living in my house, because I have, a big family, is I have to change my expectations for kind of the level of privacy or the level of control that I can have in my environment. I regularly worked from home pre-coronavirus era, but no one else was here. So I had full privacy, and I didn't have crazy things happening in the middle of big calls and big presentations and things like that. So that's an example of something that's more about my internal change that needs to happen in this transition. Step 2, I want you to take a second, and I want you to make an assessment on paper of what your resources are. what kind of resources do you have right now? And these can be internal or external. So what strengths do you have that might actually help you in this moment? And these can be characteristics. These can be things like, well, I'm an optimistic person, or I'm determined, or I tend to be tenacious. So what are your strengths at this moment? And then you know what we're going to talk about, because I just gave a little preview into what this might be, is what traits of mine, so this is again like what's going on internally, may make this difficult as I move through all of these changes that are happening around me. So what are some of my personal traits that might make this difficult? I shared in my example that sometimes I get a little hyper when I'm feeling overwhelmed and I start doing things without thinking. So that can be a real liability, especially for my well-being. But some other examples are, I get bored. As an entrepreneur, I tend to sometimes think boredom is a great thing, because a lot of really amazing things have happened throughout history when someone's quote unquote bored. Fables have it that J.K. Rowling thought up the entire Harry Potter, series in a time when a train broke down and she couldn't move, and I guess she was bored and started being super creative. But anyway, some examples are, I'm overconfident, things like that. And what I want you to do, and this is super important because we're looking at the difference between what can be controlled and what can't. We have a lot of things right now that we cannot control that we wish were not happening. But part of step two is I want you to write down, what can you do about this? Realistically, like, what are actions you can do about this in the moment? Again, this is an exercise that ideally you have a lot of time for, so maybe you can just write them down now. I know that someone on my team is recording this, so you can come back to this later also if it feels overwhelming to write it as we go. Step 3, I want you to assess the stress in your life. Now, I know for some people this can feel really triggering because you're writing down things that are actively stressing you out, but I promise you there is a therapeutic benefit to actually getting it out onto the paper. What stressful circumstances am I facing right now? Ideally, this is a full inventory of what types of things are stressful right now. And then next to each one, I want you to write down what effect is each one have on making this transition, right? What are the stresses, and what are each, what of all those stresses, what effect is each one going to have as I'm making this transition? And so a part of step 3, the final question is, what do I need to take better care of myself as I move through the transition process? And this can be practical, kind of logical. It can be emotional. For some people, it may be having a supportive person. It may be having an expert to work with. What do I need to take better care of myself as I move through this? It may be just to have a few conversations to make sure you're building kind of supportive people in your life, or asking people who maybe aren't supportive or who are undermining maybe to bring to their attention things that are taking you off your course at this moment. Okay, step 4, assessing your environment. Where can I turn for sources of support? Okay, online. Everything's online. There's so many resources right now that are sources of support. But a part of this exercise, and especially when I'm doing it with someone individually, is thinking about reality. Like, what actually feels supportive to you? What kinds of formats are really supportive for real? It's not just the online resources. It may be connecting with a supportive friend. What do you need to ask for? Now, for some people, asking for help is super hard. So it may be that you need to actually do work on that first. But the idea behind this is thinking about your environment and things outside you that might actually be available to you with a little bit of effort and a little bit of access and work. Step 5. Now in step 5, you're going to assess your assessment. So looking back at steps 1 through 4, taking a look and going through it again, just like you would if you're editing something that you're writing. What else might you need to consider that isn't listed? What are factors in your life right now that are playing a part in this that you haven't already written? And the last step is super important because it brings you back to yourself. So step 6 is to consider all of these factors that were just mentioned. This gets into yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, the environment, what's going on around you, the things you can control, the things you can't. And in this last one, I want you to write down, what are your main goals right now for this process? Because what we're looking at is a very stressful environment. And when we start to narrow down what are your actual goals in this moment, things like, I want to be healthy during this time period. That's a great goal. So what does that look like when you and then you've got it all outside of yourself. You've got it all represented in words and pictures and ideas. What's it going to take for you to be healthy? What are you going to have to change? What cadence are you in right now that might need to be modified to help your system feel okay during this transition? And this type of exercise is just one of many, many exercises. I just wanted to highlight this one. And I also want to go over some of the things that can actually help you in the moment to downshift what might be going on in your nervous system. One of them is very specific and easily doable, and it's used a lot by the Humanitarian Assistance Program of EMDR International Association, which I'm a member of. EMDR stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing, and it's a therapeutic intervention that has many steps to it. And what it's most famous for is one part of the steps, which utilizes bilateral stimulation, which is stimulation through visual, auditory, or sensory inputs to the right and left sides of the brain in a sequential manner. Often when people are first hearing about EMDR, that's all they think about is the bilateral stimulation part of it, but that's only one part of what it takes to actually create an environment where you can go in and rewire what's going on deep in your body. But what I want to share is this exercise, which is called the butterfly hug. I shared it a few weeks ago, but I want to go over it again. I want to share this exercise because it actually is super accessible. It's why they use it in big disasters when they're working with 50 people at a moment, right? It's not a therapeutic one-on-one type of situation because it's just too much. It's bigger than that. And what it does is it accesses that bilateral stimulation within your own body. And when you're not being guided by a professional and actually targeting directly changes that you want to make, what it does is it helps your system to calm down, and it's transportable and you can do it anytime. And this is what it looks like. It's called the butterfly hug because you cross your arms to each shoulder and you're basically doing a tactile stimulation to the right and left sides of your body in a sequential way. And you can say, hey, I'm going to think about something that's pretty distressing. I'm going to bring it up on purpose. And I'm just going to tap. And I'm going to breathe through it. And what happens is this practice where you're giving this sequential tactile input to your system actually helps your body process that material. So you can do it that way where you're bringing up something in a pointed way that's distressing. And believe me, hey, it could be old trauma stuff or it could be present day stuff because I feel like stuff's coming at me a mile a minute. I don't know how many people right now are business owners, but today is the day that you can apply for this, federal disaster money. And so tensions are running high and new information is coming out every 15 minutes. And, new information comes in and you just, can take that and use this to help your system do a much deeper exhale. You don't have to target anything though. You can actually just be with yourself and notice that, wow, I am on high alert. I'm kind of scanning my environment and If I look at the facts of the situation right at this moment, I don't need to do that. My system is just on overdrive, so I can do it again. So it's called the butterfly hug because of this thing. You don't have to do it this way. You can use your hands, tap your thighs, tap your knees, same thing. You can tap your feet on the ground, and you're going to get the same type of benefit. When we're doing EMDR, we actually have a light bar. We have auditory inputs that might have music going from side to side. It might have beeping going from side to side. And you can actually go online and get some of those auditory tracks that have been recorded. David Grand, who is the founder of Brain Spotting, another brain-based therapy I'm not going to go into right now, actually has recorded a number of music tracks that you can just go on iTunes or go on different music repositories and find some of those tracks. So that's another way that you can start to use this to downshift your nervous system. So I'm noticing the time. Let me see if there's anything else that I can share with you. I guess one thing I'll share that's standard kind of in the world of crisis management is that we tend to look at crisis intervention in 3 stages. We are still kind of in the first stage in some ways because we're not sure where we are, on changes to our ability to move in our world. I know people are hailing in from different areas, so they may actually be different from one area to another area. But in the pre-crisis stage, that's all about preparation and prevention. So things like things and activities that boost your immune system might be more preparatory in case of contact with the virus. Preparatory might also be like some of the things my company's been doing on a business level, which is forecasting using data and looking at things that might be coming in the next few months. So it's kind of prevention based, like what are we looking at in terms of the well-being of my employees? How can I take care of them? More prevention based. We're not in it yet. In some ways, we're in it. So the next stage actually has to do with crisis response. What I'm sharing each week here has more to do with crisis response. I know full well that each one of us have changes going around us all the time. I know full well, no matter who you are, that you have not lived in a bubble. Well, I don't think anyone on the call has lived in a bubble. And so your life hasn't been perfect. There have been things that have hurt you. There have been relationships that have hurt you. There may have been traumas that you've lived through. And guess what our body does? Even if you are the most accomplished person who has utilized therapeutic services and you are good and you are symptom free and you are like living your best life, when distress gets dialed up, then our bodies go right back to however we coped with things from the past. I've certainly had a lot of clients and people in the community saying, hey, I've already done all this work. Why is this starting to happen again? I thought I was over that and it was done. Well, we're in a fluid environment. And as the environment changes, it's not stagnant. So your level, it's kind of like being like, I've run a marathon. I know how to do that. My lungs are conditioned. My heart is conditioned. Oh, well, now they put the incline on mountain setting. And now the marathon isn't 26 miles, it's 45 miles. Like the parameters have changed. And so stretching, growing, adapting is required. And that's a big part of the in the moment crisis management. It's about flexibility and adaptability. And oftentimes some of those things that we might have already worked through or symptoms that we had in a previous chapter can come back. And it doesn't mean you're backsliding. It just means that the environment around you has changed. And so we have to change and adapt to meet that. I know that's been a big anxiety for people during this time period. And then, of course, you can imagine that the third stage of being in a crisis is post-crisis, which has a lot to do with the change. And even the quote I shared at the beginning of our time together, it has to do with taking stock, kind of reassessing values. You can start doing some of this type of stuff even in the midst of a crisis. But I promise you, as a person who's been working in the field of crisis and trauma for almost 30 years, you won't be the same. None of us are going to be the same as individuals or as a society. People are looking at their values differently. They're looking at the way that they invest in things differently. And I'm not talking about time investment. I am talking about time investment, not money investment. But the resource of time is a really valuable one. And thinking about and revamping the way that we might decide to invest our time is a big part of going through a crisis. Who do I want to be more connected to? What types of activities do I want to be doing more? Where was busyness in my life kind of getting in the way of things that are important to me? And that is real. That there are, just the same way we have a lot of losses right now, there is a great opportunity for looking at what might be possible. And we can't really get to that if our system's hijacked, if we're totally overloaded by the transitions that are around us. So that's a big part of my hope with these weekly community gatherings too, is to be able to give here and now types of resources so that we can keep our system down and get an outlet for things that might be really overwhelming.